They've done a full background check as much as they could possibly do. And I mean, I'm pretty thankful for them to spend the time and spend the resources to try to figure out everything.
An extensive search on Martel's property and the surrounding 8.5 square kilometers has turned up only a few clues. One was a boot print matching Lily's size 11 feet. Another was a pink blanket hanging from a tree found by family members of the children's mother.
He's awfully grateful for the police who still haven't found his kids or even a lick of evidence. Remember, his in-laws found the print and blanket, not the cops. And based on what his background check turned up, he's way too grateful that they ran that. For the past few videos in this series, we've been breaking down the Globe and Mail's bombshell expose of all the adults in Lily and Jack's life. We've looked at the in-laws, the grandparents, etc. And finally, it's Daniel's turn.
Daniel Martel has known since the day Jack and Lily disappeared that he was a suspect. He's been their stepfather for more than 2 years, living together in this trailer. Martel says that's why he has fully cooperated with police.
Yeah, everything from my phone, doing a polygraph exam, and just ask them to do, here you go, search everything, just do everything you can for the kids, right?
Once again, I'm going to point out just how strange it is that Daniel is grateful to these police who haven't found his kids after 4 months, didn't even find any of the physical evidence, and also never even issued the Amber Alert that he and his girlfriend were so adamant about. If you've watched any of my other playlists about missing children, you'll know that actual innocent parents of missing children usually have very contentious relationships with the police because they're frustrated until they find their kid. As far as the parent's concerned, they're failing.
A single boot print in the mud and a torn pink blanket fluttering from a tree branch. Those are the fragments that continue to haunt this investigation. They are small pieces in a case defined more by what is missing than what has been found. And as each week passes, the gaps in the story surrounding Lily and Jack's disappearance pull investigators, family members, and the wider community into deeper tension. Before we continue, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell so you get first-hand updates on this unfolding story and others like it. The investigation into Daniel Martel began quietly, long before the public knew his name. When children vanish without witnesses, without tracks, and without a clear direction of travel, investigators turn to the adults closest to them. Martel, as a central figure in the household, underwent the kind of deep background review normally reserved for major criminal probes. Officers examined employment records, financial statements, phone logs, and long-term communication patterns. They pulled data from service providers, issued warrants for cloud storage, and reconstructed movements using cellular and banking metadata. These checks do not imply guilt. They are simply part of the investigative procedure in cases where the timeline is thin and the absence of evidence leaves only people's past behavior to examine. But the intensity of these checks grew as officers moved beyond paperwork. They conducted interviews with former colleagues, neighbors, and extended family, looking for inconsistencies, sudden lifestyle changes, or past conduct that might shape understanding of his actions in the days leading up to the disappearance. Investigators also reviewed any law enforcement encounters attached to Martel's name, no matter how minor, and mapped them onto a broader timeline to identify possible patterns. This background work is slow, tedious, and often unrewarding, yet it forms a foundation for everything that follows. In this case, it served mainly to eliminate vast areas of speculation and narrow attention onto only a handful of verifiable details. The physical search around Martel's property was equally extensive. What began as a standard grid sweep quickly expanded into an 8.5 square kilometer operation involving officers, trained K-9 units, drones, and volunteer teams rotating in shifts across challenging terrain. Searchers pushed through swampy sections, heavy brush, and irregular forest lines where visibility drops quickly, making even a narrow path difficult to track. These searches are methodical. Every step is logged, every area marked, and each run is compared against previous routes to ensure no section is missed. The key discovery during these early sweeps was a boot print matching a children's size 11, the same size Lily wore. But the print offered no clear trail, no consecutive line of impressions leading somewhere definitive. It stood alone, without direction, like a single punctuation mark in a sentence that hasn't been written. Another discovery, this time by relatives, added to the confusion. A pink blanket, recognizable to the family, was found hanging from a tree branch on the property. Whether it had been placed there intentionally or simply caught by the wind became a point of debate, but the image itself struck an emotional nerve. Investigators photographed it, bagged it, and entered it into evidence with the same care they would give to a major forensic item. The discovery raised questions. Why was it outside? How long had it been there, and could its placement point to movement on the night the children vanished? Shortly afterward, officers seized a small piece of blanket found in the family's own trash bin. Even though it appeared to be ordinary discarded fabric, every textile item matters when the case lacks more substantial physical clues. These pieces underwent testing for fibers, environmental exposure, and any possible biological traces. With so few physical clues, investigators leaned heavily on procedural tools. Polygraph examinations, though not admissible in court, are still widely used as investigative aids. In this case, Martel and several relatives underwent 6 separate tests. Polygraphs are designed to chart physiological responses to direct questioning, not to determine guilt, but to guide investigators toward contradictions, stress points, or statements requiring deeper scrutiny. For some observers, the number of tests seemed excessive, but in cases defined by uncertainty, investigators often repeat examinations to ensure results align consistently. Despite the intensity of these procedures, the RCMP maintained as of July 16 that the case was not classified as criminal. This distinction matters because it limits the scope of certain police powers and reflects the fact that, without clear evidence of abduction or foul play, investigators must treat the disappearance as a missing persons case. But that did not diminish the volume of information pouring in. The public submitted roughly 740 tips and over 9,300 videos, doorbell footage, trail cam clips, dash cam angles, and cell phone recordings. Every submission had to be logged, categorized, and reviewed by officers trained to spot small visual cues that the average person would overlook. Yet, even with this enormous public contribution, the search for a decisive lead remained frustratingly open-ended. Meanwhile, Martel's public statements introduced another layer of complexity. He repeatedly praised investigators, thanked them for their efforts, and expressed trust in the police process. Some viewed this as genuine. Others interpreted it as an attempt to align himself with law enforcement to reduce suspicion. In high-profile disappearances, public behavior often becomes part of the narrative, whether fairly or not. Analysts, reporters, and community members all noticed the tone of his comments, and speculation grew around whether such consistent praise indicated cooperation or calculated ingratiation. Investigators, however, do not evaluate guilt based on personality or public demeanor. They evaluate patterns, timelines, and corroborated facts. Family tensions soon escalated into open conflict, and these fractures further complicated the case. Accusations of meth use surfaced, relationships splintered, and separations unfolded in real time while investigators attempted to extract reliable statements from people who were no longer communicating with each other. When families fracture, timelines become harder to verify. The same event may be remembered differently depending on emotional strain, and statements that were once consistent begin to diverge. These shifts create more work for investigators, who must then cross-check interviews for discrepancies tied not to deception, but to stress, anger, or personal fractures. The cumulative picture is one of exhaustive work producing only a handful of tangible clues. Investigators found a boot print, blanket fragments, and a series of personal behaviors that raise questions, but stop short of forming a direct line of evidence. They performed full background checks, polygraph series, data extractions from phones and GPS sources, and expansive searches across fields, trails, and forest corridors. Yet the most important answers, where Lily and Jack are and what exactly happened to them, remain out of reach. This case now sits in an uneasy space between possibility and certainty. The physical evidence is thin, the procedural work is heavy, and the personal dynamics around the family are turbulent. The RCMP's massive intake of tips and videos shows how deeply the community wants answers, but also highlights how complex the task is when the critical lead still hasn't emerged. The lasting takeaway is that small pieces of evidence, even fragments, can matter, but only when they connect to something larger. So far, the pieces have not connected. Investigators continue to sift through data, reconcile timelines, and test every item that might anchor the children's final known moments. Until a clear breakthrough arrives, this case remains suspended in uncertainty, a reminder of how quickly a story can collapse into silence and how long communities can hold their breath waiting for truth to surface.